Actually, my parents. Yesterday, I was run over by a car driven by my mother-in-law and rushed to the hospital. After the surgery, while I was resting, my husband called. After you were taken away yesterday, the police came. I told them you were startled by the car and fell. But now they're saying someone saw Mom run you over. Summarizing my husband's excited rambling, it seems both my in-laws were taken to the police station. I was indeed injured by my mother-in-law driving the car yesterday. Yet, both the person who ran me over and my father-in-law, who was in the passenger seat, lied in their testimony. My husband had orchestrated it, making it seem like I fell and got injured. I was dumbfounded for a while. Hey! Are you listening? Anyway, you need to go and explain that it was just a fall. That's the first thing he says to me after I was rushed to the hospital. My anger reached its limit, and I decided to take revenge on my husband and in-laws. They must think I'll always do as they wish, but that won't happen. Then it struck me. Yes, this will surely prove I was run over by my mother-in-law. In pain, I reached for my phone again. My name is Emma, I'm 50 years old. Since marrying, I've been a homemaker. I met my husband, Hayden, in my 20s, a typical office romance. He was assigned to look after me when I joined the company. He wasn't particularly handsome or appealing to women. Naturally, I had no romantic feelings for him. I never saw him as more than a colleague, just diligently following his instructions every day. However, working together, he took a keen interest in me. I thought he was just happy to have a subordinate close to his age, but gradually realized it was more than that. Initially reluctant, I started feeling good about being flattered every day. Thinking back, I don't know what I saw in him. But I fell for his sweet talk, and we started dating. We worked together for a while, and about a year later, he proposed. Having no reason to refuse, I accepted. Convincing myself this was what life was about, I started a new chapter. At my husband's behest, I quit my job and, without discussion, started living at his parents' house. I had visited my in-laws a few times before marrying but never imagined living with them. They were warm and welcoming on those few occasions, which reassured me. By that time, my father-in-law had retired, so I spent my days with them while my husband was at work. There was no sweet newlywed life. It was nothing like I had imagined. At first, they seemed somewhat considerate, but their attitude towards me changed over time. My mother-in-law's demands grew day by day, crushing my spirit. You're able to be a homemaker thanks to Hayden, so you better be perfect at housework. Whenever something slightly displeased her, she would eagerly scold me. She never doubted her mission to educate the imperfect daughter-in-law, which seemed to be her life's purpose. She lived with her mother-in-law too and often bored me with stories of back in my day. Times and values have changed. Being forced to accept her outdated mindset was nothing but a nuisance. But due to my position, I had no choice but to silently endure her constant nagging. She often went to a cafe with her friends of the same age, where they seemingly enjoyed bashing their daughters-in-law. Oddly enough, they didn't brag about how great their daughters-in-law were, but rather competed over who had the worst one. Hearing these stories made me wonder if I would end up like them, filling me with dread. As for my father-in-law, he wasn't exactly supportive either. Although he didn't antagonize me like my mother-in-law, he complained about my cooking almost daily. The seasoning is too strong today. Are you trying to get rid of the elderly quickly? His old-fashioned attitude, viewing women as inferior, was evident. Whenever the topic comes up, he keeps saying how women should be. That women should be considerate and assist men, or that they should understand things without being told. It's embarrassingly idealistic. I guess some people never change, always acting high and mighty no matter their age. My father-in-law doesn't exactly pick on me. He's more about boasting his beliefs to me, proud of his outdated thinking. He'll probably never realize his mistakes and just keep getting older like this. They're just like those unpleasant in-laws you see in dramas. I've tried discussing it with my husband several times, but he always gives vague responses. Instead, as our marriage has gotten longer, he started blaming me. My parents are elderly, you should be kinder to them. Isn't that what a daughter-in-law should do? Like father, like son. Following in his parents' footsteps, my husband also started to look down on and exploit me. He doesn't help with anything when he comes home, just sits there as if it's the most natural thing. Maybe things would have been different if we had kids, but we never had any. I went to the hospital for infertility treatments until my late 30s, but the dream never came true. Right after we got married, my in-laws were always pressuring me about when they would see a grandchild. It's not entirely my fault. Children are a blessing. It's ridiculous to think about having a baby just for my in-laws. I figured there was no need to force it, so I gave up when I turned 40. In this less than happy life, there were people who supported me. The couple who lived across the street. Juliana and Kyle lived together without any children. Kyle's mother had lived with her mother-in-law and she didn't want to cause the same trouble, so he refused to live together. Juliana was there for me during my infertility struggles and even listened to my complaints about my in-laws. My in-laws and husband are all about appearances, so Juliana was initially surprised. "I thought your husband was a nice guy. It's a bit off-putting that he's still not independent from his parents at his age." Thanks to Juliana, I managed to get through life without getting too overwhelmed. My mother-in-law, over 75, still drives herself when going out. It looks dangerous, and I've warned my husband, but he doesn't listen. If I suggest she should give up her driver's license, he explodes, "Are you calling my mom an idiot?" He gets furious, thinking I'm insulting his mother. I tried talking to my mother-in-law too, but she still thinks she's young. "Are you treating me like an old lady? You're really unpleasant," she says, getting as angry as my husband. I was worried something terrible might happen, and it did, but not in the way I expected. That day, as usual, I walked to the nearby supermarket. Without a driver's license, walking is mostly how I get around. I thought about getting a license after starting a job, but I got married sooner than expected. When I discussed it with my husband, he was against it, saying, "I can drive, so you don't need it." On sale days, I end up with too much to carry, but there's no way I can ask my husband or mother-in-law for a ride. My husband, who used to happily offer a ride when we were younger, now just scoffs and refuses. I was carrying heavy bags and had just gotten back home when I noticed. The garage door was open. Did she say she was going out today? My mother-in-law hadn't mentioned anything when I left the house. Well, never mind, I thought, passing the garage to head to the front door, when suddenly a car roared out of the garage at high speed. "Oh!" It was the only silly thing I could utter in surprise. The next moment, the car hit me without slowing down. It threw me backward by the impact and groceries tumbled from my bags. In that position, my body slammed into the asphalt. Dazed, not understanding what happened, I felt a sharp pain in the back of my head from the impact. I couldn't get up. All I could do was lie there, looking up at the sky. How long had passed when I realized Juliana was looking down at me. "Hang in there! I've called an ambulance, everything's gonna be okay." Juliana's face, speaking to me, was pale and strained. I wondered if things had gotten that serious. A naive question crossed my mind. As I moved my aching head slightly, I could see blood flowing from it. Seeing this, I began to understand the gravity of my situation. I started to realize the seriousness of the situation. But there was nothing I could do, unable to move. Soon, I could hear the ambulance siren getting closer. "Just a little longer! They're almost here, hang on!" As I listened to Juliana's desperate encouragement, my head started to feel fuzzy. "No, no! Just a little longer!" Despite her words, I closed my eyes. When I opened them again, I was lying on a hospital bed. A tube 4 was connected to my hand, and I could see the fluid dripping continuously. Realizing I was saved, tears naturally flowed. Moving my head slightly brought sharp pain. It was no wonder, given the bleeding. "Ugh!" As I groaned in bed, a nurse rushed over. "You shouldn't move your head yet." I had many questions, but listened silently to the nurse's explanation. It had been 1 day since the accident. I was rushed to the hospital by the emergency team called by Juliana. After arriving, I underwent surgery to stitch up my head and survived. Juliana had stayed with me the whole time, and now she had returned home as it was past visiting hours. It seemed she had contacted my husband Hayden too, but after telling him the surgery was successful, he didn't say anything else. My whole body was in pain, but there was no life-threatening injury. I just needed to rest for a while. However, I didn't feel like doing anything. With so many things to think about, I just closed my eyes. Soon after, my phone on the bedside table started ringing insistently. I didn't want to answer, but the calls persisted. After several repeats, it seemed there was no sign of giving up. I found my phone without moving my head and saw Hayden on the screen. Thinking he must be worried, I answered with a slight relief. "Help! Actually, my parents." Hayden started speaking without giving me a chance to talk. "After you were taken away yesterday, the police came. I told them you were startled by the car and fell. But now they're saying someone saw Mom run you over." Summarizing my husband's frantic story, it seems both of my in-laws had been taken to the police station. Indeed, I was injured by a car driven by my mother-in-law. Yet, she and my father-in-law, who was in the passenger seat, had lied. Even Hayden had instructed them to agree that I had fallen and got hurt. I was dumbfounded for a while. Fortunately, the car wasn't damaged. Dad wasn't hurt, but Mom seemed to have twisted her neck from the collision. Despite that, poor them, the police are being so one-sided. He was more concerned about the car and his parents, oblivious to my shock. How rotten can this family be? Since picking up the phone, has he said even one word of concern for me? No, nothing. He was only worried about his parents, taken to the police, and even wanted me to prove their innocence. "Hey! Are you listening? Anyway, you need to go and explain it was just a fall. The number you have dialed is currently..." He was talking to me one-sidedly, but he was surprised by my first response. "Huh?" I cut off the call. Calls from Hayden continued for a while, but I, infuriated, set my phone to reject his calls. I later learned that my in-laws had been taken to the police station, just as my husband had said on the phone. Sometime later, my husband Hayden was also taken to the police station where my in-laws were waiting. It was Juliana, our neighbor, who had seen everything unfold. She was the one who had originally called the police about my mother-in-law's crime. After accompanying me in the ambulance, she handled various procedures in place of Hayden. She was questioned by the police officers who arrived at the scene. It seems her questioning happened after they had already spoken to my in-laws, serving as a sort of corroboration of the story. Juliana noticed the accident when she heard a loud noise outside. Looking out her window, she saw me lying on the street. And she hurriedly called an ambulance before rushing out. By that time, my mother-in-law's car was gone, and it wasn't clear what had happened. Juliana was more concerned about my safety than finding the cause. When questioned, she told the truth. However, my in-laws immediately denied any suggestion by the police that I had been hit by a car. Sensing something was off, Juliana kept thinking even after the police officer left. After ensuring my surgery was complete, she returned home and discussed the incident with her husband Kyle. Then Kyle came up with an unexpected solution. "The car's dashcam, it records 24/7. The accident happened right in front of our car, it must have caught everything." They checked the camera in their car together. Just as I thought. True to Kyle's hunch, the moment of my accident was recorded. The footage unmistakably showed my mother-in-law hitting me with her car. After I fell, my father-in-law peeked out of the car window before they drove away. It was a clear hit and run. Armed with the footage of my in-laws' crime, they went to the police station. They were able to prove that I hadn't simply fallen and injured myself. The police, having heard from Juliana, immediately questioned my in-laws. Despite the video evidence, my in-laws were reluctant to admit their guilt. "That video is a setup. Someone is trying to frame me. Officer, please, you can't put an old lady like me in jail, right?" Both my mother-in-law and father-in-law were embarrassingly adamant in denying the crime. Eventually, my mother-in-law admitted guilt, claiming she was instructed to hide the truth by her son. Indeed, Hayden had told his parents to align their stories. But I questioned my mother-in-law's sanity for betraying her own son to save herself. My father-in-law, perhaps tired from the interrogation, admitted that he was in the passenger seat but had fled without helping me. When the police interrogated Hayden, he also struggled to admit his involvement. Then a detective came to my hospital room. Your parents both say they were instructed by their son to cover up the accident. At first, they lied through their teeth, but this seems to be the truth. Perhaps feeling sorry for my ordeal, the detective spoke with evident regret. They inspected the car but found no major damage. If Hayden had repaired any damage to the car, it would have been considered evidence tampering. However, Hayden wisely decided against it. Since then, I haven't seen Hayden at all and have lost all affection for him. I told the detective about the phone call. He then said that at that time he had instructed his parents to keep their mouths shut. The detective sighed deeply after hearing this. I don't know what to say. I can only imagine how you feel. He sympathized with me, someone who had been betrayed by her family after suffering a serious injury requiring surgery. After a while of heavy silence, the detective bowed deeply and left the room. A few days later, when I was about to be discharged from the hospital, the police contacted me again. Juliana, who had come to pick me up in place of Hayden, drove me straight to the station. The detective from the previous day greeted us. It turned out he was the same one who had heard Juliana's story, and he led us inside. In the room, we were met with the gaunt figures of Hayden and my in-laws. Emma! My mother-in-law, upon seeing me enter the room guided by the detective, suddenly began to tear up. I thought it was insincere, but she seemed genuinely crying. Whether she felt relieved to see a family member or was relieved to see me alive, hoping for a lighter sentence, I couldn't tell. We waited for my mother-in-law to calm down before beginning. A female officer soothed her, and she finally seemed ready to talk. My father-in-law, sitting next to her, looked utterly exhausted and kept repeating "I'm sorry" to me. The specific purpose of the day was to align the details of the accident with me, the victim, present. The screen displayed the footage of the accident submitted by Juliana. While watching it, the detective proceeded to discuss each detail. My in-laws answered the questions honestly, and I nodded in agreement, confirming the facts. The main issue was whether my husband Hayden was involved. Following my statement, his call history had been checked, which proved he had called me. However, even now, Hayden continued to deny any involvement. I, unfortunately, hadn't recorded the content of our call, so the conversation wasn't progressing. Are you trying to frame me too, you liar? At times, the detective calmed Hayden, who became emotional and appeared agitated. Please stop. Lying any further will only lead to your regret. Do you want to betray your own mother and father to save yourself? My warnings fell on deaf ears. Feeling an impasse, the detective spoke up. So, your parents are continuing to lie to the police, is that correct? With that question, Hayden fell silent. My words carried a different weight. Your mother running over your wife is clearly captured on the video, which both of your parents have admitted to. But according to you, your parents, out of self-preservation, are implicating you as an accomplice. The detective's serious tone made Hayden's face tense. Do you understand? The crimes of your parents are becoming even more serious. Hearing this, Hayden finally admitted his guilt. At the very end, he realized the gravity of his actions. With Hayden's confession, all three were fully exposed. Police officers in the room started moving around hurriedly. Regarding this matter, the detective then turned to me, discussing whether I wanted to withdraw the complaint. While the crimes committed by the three couldn't be erased, this decision would significantly alter their fate. However, I firmly declined. I was lucky to survive, but their decision to flee the scene right after the accident is unforgivable. I'll be filing a complaint to ensure they pay for their crimes. My decision caused a significant stir among them. My mother-in-law cried out loud, and both my father-in-law and Hayden slumped in despair. They probably never imagined I would make such a ruthless decision. They all believed themselves to be good spouses, a good mother-in-law, and a good father-in-law, assuming I would naturally forgive them. Had they handled the situation properly after the accident, it wouldn't have come to this. But my in-laws chose to protect themselves over my life. Hayden prioritized his parents' and public image over his wife's life. I want them to reflect on the gravity of their actions and duly pay for their crimes. I stood up silently and left the room. Accompanied by Juliana, I started the paperwork in a separate room. Living with my in-laws and Hayden for years. It would be a lie if I said that it doesn't hurt my heart. Above all, I was the one most hurt. Even if my physical injuries heal, this trauma will follow me for life. Despite not having done anything wrong, I felt far from relieved. By the time we left the police station, it was already dark. Juliana, thoughtful as always, invited me to a celebratory dinner for my discharge. I gratefully accepted her invitation and headed to Juliana's home. Warmly welcomed by Juliana and Kyle, we enjoyed a meal together. For the first time in a long while, I laughed. They treated me as usual, with care and kindness. Even though my in-laws and Hayden were no longer in my life, I was now on my own. With legal proceedings and other tasks ahead. It felt overwhelming. But at that moment, I chose to forget all that and genuinely enjoyed myself. The morning after that pleasant night, I decided to divorce Hayden. There was no need to keep tormenting myself. Hayden seemed a bit chastened by the whole ordeal, but I realized I couldn't love him anymore. I immediately contacted a lawyer and brought up the subject of divorce with Hayden. At first, he seemed surprised, but soon he agreed, seemingly understanding the situation. I couldn't bear to see Hayden's pathetic state any longer, so I left everything else to my lawyer. The three of them faced criminal charges, and in addition, they were ordered to pay me a settlement. Since the divorce was largely Hayden's fault, I received a significant amount in alimony. I decided to leave my in-laws' house and rented an apartment with the money I received. I had planned to start anew in a distant place, but I chose to stay in the familiar town. There is a reason I didn't move away. Juliana's husband, Kyle, owned a company. He invited me to help out at his company. Juliana was also helping there, and I thought it would be nice to work together. I had been invited before but always declined, fearing what my in-laws or Hayden might say. Honestly, with the alimony I received, I didn't need to work anymore. But Juliana and Kyle were concerned about me. Suddenly being alone, they gave me a sense of purpose. Having spent decades as a housewife, working with friends was very enjoyable. There were many new things that confused me, but it became a significant part of my life. And so, with this new life, an unexpected encounter awaited me. I met a man through work and decided to remarry. I had told him about my divorce, but kept quiet about the alimony until we got married. He didn't blame me for it. "It's natural to be cautious after what you've been through," he said with a smile. My life changed drastically in my middle years. Perhaps more fulfilling and happier than my younger years. I was betrayed and hurt by someone I trusted for many years, but I found greater happiness that surpassed it. Grateful to the friends who always reached out to me, I began walking towards a brighter future.